Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this weekly AgWeather update brought to you by the Farm Credit Associations of North Carolina. Well, the big story for the start of this week is that this is the third time in the last 7 days we've seen frost events getting deep into the south. It had been a very long time since we put cold air into the southeast, but the jet stream has now set itself up for, again, this morning for another major frost event getting all the way down to the Gulf Coast. So all of the coloring that you see here represents a freeze warning, and there's still a freeze watch out for parts of coastal right here along the coast in South Carolina. Now this morning at about 5:20 a.m. Central Time, 6:20 Eastern, just as the sun was rising, we were trying to get an idea on the coldest temperatures here. We can see where that frost line made it to last night. And so this is some very cold air, and again, the third time we've seen this happen. One of the big reasons for this has been we've lost that big subtropical ridge we saw over the southeast for so many weeks. And on top of that, we had high pressure move in, and it's cleared the skies out. I'm going to show you what it looked like yesterday. So what you're going to notice here is this whole area almost completely cloud-free with the exception of parts of like Florida, Georgia, this area down here. And under that, we just had plenty of high pressure and cleared the skies out, and winds came out very lightly out of the northwest. We had strong radiational cooling last night. What's kind of interesting to notice, and this is outside of North Carolina, of course, but all of this through parts of Arkansas, Oklahoma, getting into Missouri, and a little bit into Tennessee in the southeast. There is some probably controlled burns that were happening yesterday, and that's what's going on with the smoke you see here. But in the overnight, continued to clear out. These clouds, which were over the eastern part of North Carolina and along the coast, are probably what prevented this area from dipping down into a frost, because the cloud cover there helped to retain some of that heat. You see it there in the infrared. But everywhere else that was clear certainly had the ability to drop off quickly to get those frosty temperatures in place. Now, as we talked about, this spring had been very mild. I love to use this map. It comes from the U.S. National Phenology Network, and it's a series of kind of data collection here, everything from temperature data to looking at the emergence of green, the spring arrival. And we can see that much of the southeast and south was 20 to even over 20 days early on spring. And when we look at the ranks up until Sunday, parts of North Carolina was having a top 10 warmest start to, from February 1st until March 19th. So very, very mild go of it. So this cold air is late. It's unwelcome. It caused a lot of freeze damage to vegetation throughout the southeast and up to the mid-Atlantic, given how warm things were ahead of this. Okay. As we look forward, we want to know if this pattern has a chance for going on a repeat. We want to talk about what our spring precipitation outlook is going to be. We want to get a bigger picture of where this is all going to go. So we're going to start up with the CPC data. They released this on Sunday. I'm recording it too early on Monday morning to get their updates, but I want you to notice a couple of things. In their 6 to 10 day forecast, they have mild air back in place, but they've also got us near normal or above normal in terms of precipitation. The coldest air is anchored in the west. The day 8 through 14, very similar. More mild air coming, and things are looking to be a bit wetter than normal for us here throughout much of the southeast and up the eastern coast. But what I want to show you is the newest outlook for the month of April. So this is their newest update. It's quite mild look for April while the cold stays anchored in the west. We see above average precipitation coming from parts of Texas and the lower Mississippi River Valley up to the Great Lakes. But they've got us at equal chances in terms of precipitation anomalies, while drier conditions are expected to come into the southwest. And there's a lot of people in California that will definitely be welcoming this as they get into the month of April. But if we can compare this to the CPC's latest data, CPC to the European data, that's what you're looking at here, it is interesting to see the wetter conditions over a much broader area in the April outlook. But the European model wants to keep delivering some cooler air at times. Now, we have to ask if this was primarily driven by the cold initialization of the model, because it is the coldest by far. The CFSV2 is not this cold. The analogs aren't this cold, but the European model is attempting to drive more colder air into place here through the first couple of weeks of April and maybe a bit beyond that as well. So I'm going to have to call this into question, tell you to be monitoring it. I do not, of course, we're not to our last frost yet at the highest elevations over toward the Appalachian Mountains, but we'll watch this carefully. I also want to say that the models have been over-predicting your precipitation. They've been too aggressive on trying to predict this. In fact, if you look back over the last 30 days, there's been numerous times where we've seen wet signals in the models that have not materialized. And that's why from Virginia through the Carolinas here, you look back over the last 30 days, we've got places that are sitting in that 30 to 60% of normal range. So we keep seeing the models do this, and I think I can explain to you why they're doing that here in just a few moments. But before I step away from this, a tremendous amount of snow in the upper Midwest, the northern Rockies. We've had plenty of rainfall coming into the Corn Belt, reviving soil moisture here. But if you get back into the Western Plains, this has been an area that's also been over-predicted on precipitation. And it's been much drier in this area than has been forecast. We're continuing to see the drought issues here just continue in a big way. Drought has been relieved in most of California, but it is anchored right here in the Western Plains. We still have about 52% of the country in some form of drought. Most of it runs north-south here in the plains of the United States. Now, thinking about that, we want to know where this is all going to go going out longer term. So this is the newest drought outlook for, in fact, let's get it to the seasonal outlook. There we go. From March 16th all the way to June 30th. While there's expected to be improvement, especially as the snow melts here in the northern plains, notice how drought remains and is expected to develop and stay anchored in the southern and western plains. There's improvement in California, but notice the models are trying to keep things quite dry in the Pacific Northwest going into early spring. So if we look at the 3-month outlook, which again was just updated late last week, they've got drier conditions here and here, very wet Ohio River Valley, eastern Great Lakes, and in New England. And we're kind of clipping that particular pattern. So I guess what we can say right now is that we do expect mild conditions to begin to prevail after this cold snap we've been in now. But I'm going to just put a big question mark around, do we actually keep wetter conditions around going forward? Now, historically, we would look at the fact that we've completely lost La Nina and that an El Nino is beginning to build very quickly. Combined with the very warm water that's in the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean, and even parts of the North Atlantic. And these would make sense when I show you this forecast for April, May, and June. All of that fits in line with what's going on there. But we need to know how quickly these transitions are happening, because remember, the ocean temperatures are just symptomatic of what the atmosphere is doing. Sea surface temperatures are. Now, we know there are deeper ocean currents that change all the time. I'm talking about the sea surface temperature pattern, the very skin temperature. This is very symptomatic what the atmosphere is up to. As I mentioned, we have lost La Nina in a hurry. So newest update here from the Bureau of Meteorology out of Australia. They've now gone over to a full El Nino watch for their fall, our spring. And I've been talking about this a lot in the last couple of weeks, but I want to make sure you see here how aggressive they are returning by August El Nino conditions, not just El Nino, but strong El Nino conditions. And I want you to know that when you compare the Australians to the Canadians, the Europeans, the Japanese, the French, the US, and the British, through May, June, July, they're about twice as fast at returning twice as warm ocean temperatures compared to the other modeling agencies. And they've got not just a full-blown El Nino by August, but possibly we would call this a super Nino, one that's above 2 degrees C, greater than average. So they're very aggressive on this. And what it might translate into when we look at those longer-term forecasts is something like this. This is now the June, July, August outlook for temperatures. There is a possibility that we could be above average on temperatures this upcoming summer, all right? And the reason for that would be the proximity to a large subtropical ridge. Now, we always know our risk, right? If the Bermuda high stays over Bermuda and the flow comes around like this, we're in business. This is daily thunderstorms. This is good moisture. There's no risk. But we know that if that Bermuda high slides toward Cape Hatteras, then the flow goes around like this. Or if it goes over the top of Nashville, then it sits here and we're completely shut down. We cannot, at this point in March, the beginning of spring now, pinpoint exactly where that's going to be. But I can show you where the models want to keep it. They want to keep it way offshore over Bermuda. I mean, actually east of Bermuda. And that's why the current summer forecast from our own Climate Prediction Center is wet. I mean, it shows up wet. So we have to watch this carefully. This is just another kind of piece of information we've got for this upcoming summer. And at this point, I don't see the stresses. But should that Bermuda high, and it can do this for many reasons, begin to move toward Raleigh, toward Nashville, shuts us down. That's when we get hot and dry. That could happen. As it stands, though, it appears that it's going to be strong and out over the open Atlantic. And if it's strong and over the open Atlantic, that's the good place for it. Keep it there. All right, let's watch all of that together. Now we come back to this near-term forecast, and we again remind ourselves of the cold air that's in place here. But we ask, how long is that colder air around? So we're going to look at only at minimum temperatures here. And so remember, we're keeping an eye on this frost line. What prevented it from getting to the coast, which means this was too cold of a forecast by the National Digital Forecast Database, was the cloud cover last night. By Tuesday, still colder conditions in place. By Wednesday, though, watch this warm up from Wednesday into Thursday and Friday. Now, these are overnight low temperatures. Now we've gone from being, 10 to 15, 20 degrees colder than normal to along the Appalachian Mountains and into central North Carolina, up here in the 20 plus degree above normal by the time we get into Friday. So major swing in temperatures coming this week. And you guessed it, there's just a big system. And that system's going to run up and soak this area. We'll be under the influence of a ridge. And that's why things are looking so warm. So what do these temperatures, let's flip over to precip. What does this precip look like? Well, right now, every model forecast has got us drier than normal through the next week plus. They're trying to bring in the wetter conditions next week, but we know that they've continued to overpredict next week, right? Every single time we've seen the models give us a wet forecast for week 2, by the time week 2 becomes week 1, there's been less rain in it. So where's the heaviest precipitation going to be? California into the Four Corner states, drier throughout the plains, and then very wet from the Mid-South through the Ohio River Valley, Tennessee Valley. So let's go see how this all plays out. This morning's European model forecast. Here's the high pressure cell that's in place, playing through Monday all the way into Tuesday. We can do this pretty quickly. High pressure's in place. That's the cooler air keeping around here. The moment that high slides east, that's when the warmth starts to get here. So it's in Wednesday. See it now, it's sitting over here, over Bermuda. And therefore the flow comes around it and it's doing this. And what that ends up producing is systems that roll to our north and not deliver much precip. I can't rule out the chance on Wednesday for a chance of a shower or a thunderstorm, but it's not widespread rainfall. You then get out there to Thursday, the front really establishes itself right here through the Mid-South up into the Ohio Valley, but we're still too close to this high, so we keep the drier and warmer conditions around. This is now getting into Friday night. When the models are attempting to bring the rainfall through us, maybe is this weekend on Saturday, right there. But that's not overly wet. So when we look out here, we break back over mild after a cold Monday, Tuesday. And then we see a chance of rain on Wednesday. Our next chance comes in on Saturday. And that comes through and we go drier for Sunday. But then you notice, as the models always try to do, into week 2, they want to bring the moisture back. See it there? But we have to question this to see if this will really happen at this point. Why this happens, I told you I'd tell you earlier, is that the longer range outlooks with our models just want to keep the west away from big ridges. So the flow is just doing something like this. And if you keep the stronger flow in the forecast, maybe it's not there in reality, but in the forecast over the top of this area, it just wants to keep it wet. And so again, a week 2 forecast that says wetter than normal from the Mid-South, Tennessee Valley, Southeast, and over North Carolina. But we'll wait to see if that really manifests itself. The coldest model I can show you is the European. So this is now for the next 5 days. There's the mild air that we expect to come in late this week and last into next week. When do we have another shot at colder air? Possibly coming in at the end of the month. The European model tries to fade that colder air at the very end of the month, the beginning of April, but doesn't have a really strong shot at really pushing it all the way across the Carolinas. So this is the European model for the first 5 days of April. This is what the GFS ensemble does. Still hangs on to the mild conditions and keeps it there for the first week of April. So we have a bit of a model battle on how far to the east this cold can get. With the U.S. model keeping it more mild, the European trying to deliver some colder air. And you say, well, Eric, which one do you trust? They both have their merits right now. And so I'm just going to say We do see the warm-up happening later this week. We'll watch it all week long to see how this manifests itself into the first week of April. But the problem is right now, this is the issue. This is a very late frost. Okay, let's stretch this out to a global outlook, and I want to talk about temperatures. Why is this capable of happening? Very mild throughout Europe and Russia. Cold air is here, and there. And because it's been displaced in these three areas, it is capable of getting out at times. But how far into the south and southeast can it make it? The next 10 days suggest we see more mild conditions than colder. Elsewhere around the world, like I said, mild in Europe, but take a look at the heat wave coming through Australia. And we need to talk about South America. So over the next 10 days, for the first time in 3 months, we have a strong, robust signal for heavy rain into Argentina. It's too late, though. This is very late in the season. This is like the Midwest getting a late September rainfall event. It's just too late in the season for this to occur. We're drier in eastern and central Brazil. They need this to be dry to get the harvest done of the first crop of soybeans and the safrinha crop planted here. It's been planted in Mato Grosso, and that's where the wetter conditions are showing up. We're still wetter in France, we're wetter in parts of the UK and Germany, but drier in the Iberian Peninsula. This is an area that we're watching for drought. And very wet as they're planting the winter crops down here in Western Australia, through South Australia, New South Wales, and Victoria. Heavy precip there. Also take note that along and south of the Yangtze, very wet weather happening here. This was an area that was in drought last year. So we'll keep an eye on all of these areas globally, and I'll report back to you next week. So I appreciate your attention. Thanks.